The coffee, the corner booth, and the unexpected request. Rain fell steadily outside the quiet diner on the edge of a small town in New Jersey. It was one of those late autumn evenings when the sky turned steel gray by 4 p.m., and the roads shimmered under a slick coat of drizzle. The kind of day that made people hurry home, craving warmth, comfort, and silence. But inside the diner, the scent of fresh coffee and grilled cheese lingered like a familiar song. The booths were half empty, the air warm, and the quiet hum. Conversation drifted through like background music in the far corner. Unnoticed by most, a man sat alone at a booth. His black umbrella leaned against the window, dripping quietly into the floor mat. He wore a simple navy blue jacket, jeans, and running shoes that had clearly seen better days. His salt and pepper hair was still damp from the rain, and a leather satchel rested beside him on the seat. He looked tired, not in the way of someone who had a long day, but in the deeper, quieter way of someone carrying too many responsibilities. His eyes scanned a menu he didn't really need. He wasn't there for the food across the room, 22-year-old. Riley James tied her apron tighter and reached for the coffee pot. She had been working double shifts all week. Bills were piling up again, and rent was overdue by almost 2 weeks. Her younger brother had outgrown his shoes, and the fridge at home had more empty shelves than full ones. But Riley had mastered the art of smiling through it. She was used to being invisible, used to taking orders with a grin and leaving every customer feeling a little lighter, while her own heart grew heavier as she approached the corner booth. She slowed down for a moment. Something about the man seemed familiar, though she couldn't place him. He didn't have the flashy air of a celebrity or the sharp look of a businessman. He seemed normal, quiet, almost too quiet. Still, she cleared her throat and put on her best waitress smile. "Hi there," she said, pouring him some coffee without asking. "Rough night out?" The man looked up, and for a second, their eyes met. His were soft and kind, like someone who had seen the world, but hadn't let it harden him. "Just passing through," he replied gently. "Needed a place to sit. Thank you for the coffee." She nodded. "Anything else I can get you?" He glanced at the menu, but then closed it slowly. "Maybe just a grilled cheese and some peace and quiet." She chuckled. "Grilled cheese and peace. Best combo we've got." Riley turned back toward the kitchen, but the odd sense of familiarity tugged at her again. She'd seen him before. Not in person, but somewhere online, maybe a video or an article. She shook it off. It didn't matter. He was just another customer, and she had work to do. Hours passed slowly. The diner stayed half full, the buzz of conversation rising and falling like waves. Sundar, though no one knew yet that's who he was, remained tucked in that corner booth, sipping coffee, and reading something on his phone with quiet intensity. He barely touched his grilled cheese, and Riley noticed. She noticed everything. It was the only way to survive in a world where no one looked twice at people like her. By the time the dinner rush ended and the sky outside had turned almost black, Riley was refilling his cup again. "You're still here," she said softly. "Must be some good coffee." He smiled, and for the first time, she noticed a weariness behind it, not sadness, something deeper. Perhaps reflection. Perhaps loss. "It's not the coffee," he said. "It's the quiet." She hesitated, then said something she normally wouldn't. "You look like you've had a lot of noise in your life." He looked up, surprised, then nodded slowly. "Yes, too much, sometimes." They stood there for a moment in that strange, quiet understanding. Strangers, yet not quite. Then, suddenly she leaned down and whispered, "Sorry to ask this, and feel free to say no, but could I ask for a bigger tip? Just this once. $50. I know it's a lot, it's just, I really need it. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." She was already blushing as she said it. Her voice shook. It was the kind of thing you don't say to a stranger, especially not a customer. It was bold, desperate, raw. But so was her life right now. Sundar froze. Not because he was offended, not because he didn't want to help, but because he hadn't expected it. The raw honesty in her voice knocked the air out of him more than any polished business pitch ever had. Most people didn't ask. Most people just hinted or suffered quietly. But here was this young woman standing in front of him with a cracked voice and honest eyes, laying her need bare. He looked at her, truly looked. Not at the uniform or the coffee stains on her apron, but at the fire in her eyes, the resilience. The courage to ask, "Why 50?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then shrugged. "I need 20 for groceries. 10 for bus fare the rest of the week, and 20 more to cover part of my rent. It's still not enough, but it'll help. I know it's crazy to ask, but..." She trailed off, her voice almost a whisper now. Sometimes you just gotta ask the universe and see what happens. The silence between them was thick. Not uncomfortable, but heavy. Heavy with meaning. Sundar slowly reached into his satchel. She braced herself, expecting a polite no or maybe a gentle excuse. Maybe he'd offer $10 instead. Or worse. Maybe he'd laugh. But what happened next was neither. He pulled out his wallet. Then something else, not a sleek black card. Not a regular credit card. A metal one, and beside it, a small engraved card with his full name on it. Riley's eyes flicked. Down and froze, the name. It struck her like lightning. Sundar Pichai. She blinked. Blinked again? It couldn't be. Wait. She whispered, "Are you..." He nodded gently, not with pride, but with quiet humility. "Yes. I'm Sundar." Her heart thudded in her chest. Her breath caught, the CEO of Google, sitting in her booth, in her small-town diner, in a rain-soaked jacket with a grilled cheese sandwich he hadn't even touched before she could speak. He laid down the black card and smiled. "But don't worry about who I am. Let's talk about who you are, and why you had the courage to ask something most people never would." She was stunned. Completely still, but before she could speak again, something outside the diner window caught Sundar's eye. A black car, headlights off, parked across the street. His smile faded. He looked at her again, softer this time, but also more urgent. "Do you trust me?" he asked, quietly. What?" She stammered. "Do you trust me?" She nodded, confused but compelled. "Good," he said, "because everything's about to change, for both of us." And then he stood up slowly, eyes still locked on the car outside. The waitress who had asked for a $50 tip suddenly realized she had just stepped into something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. Asterisk shadows in the rain and secrets in the booth for a moment. The world outside the diner stood still. The black car parked across the street remained silent and unmoving, its tinted windows cloaked in rain. But Sundar's eyes never left it. There was something unsettling in his stare, not fear exactly, but a kind of readiness. Like someone who had been in these situations before. Someone who knew that silence could be more dangerous than noise. Riley stood frozen by the table, her heart racing. 1 second ago, she was just a waitress asking for a bigger tip. Now she was standing beside one of the most powerful men in the world, and he was asking if she trusted him. Something didn't feel right, and the air had changed. It was thicker now, like the calm before a storm. "What's going on?" She whispered, barely loud enough to hear herself. Sundar looked at her, his expression composed but serious. "We need to talk somewhere more private. Can you take a break?" Riley hesitated. Her shift wasn't over for another 45 minutes. But something in his voice, gentle but firm, told her this was no ordinary moment. She looked around. The diner was quiet now, the dinner rush long gone. Only 2 booths remained occupied, and the night cook was busy in the kitchen. "I can sneak out for a bit," she said. He nodded. "Grab your jacket." They stepped out into the cold together. The rain had softened to a mist, clinging to their clothes like secrets. Riley's breath clouded in the air as they walked toward the alley beside the diner, away from the black car and its unblinking gaze. When they were out of sight, Sundar leaned against the brick wall and took a deep breath. "Riley," he said, "what I'm about to tell you might sound strange, but please listen." She nodded, heart pounding. Earlier today, I was in New York. Meetings, press, the usual chaos. But there was something different. A file landed on my desk. A leak. Someone inside one of our projects was planning something unethical, illegal. Someone powerful, someone who thought they were untouchable. He paused, watching her reaction. She was trying to follow, trying to make sense of this sudden shift from coffee and grilled cheese to corporate espionage. I knew I couldn't trust my usual security team. He continued, too many eyes, too many mouths. So I did something I haven't done in years. I disappeared. No assistant. No guards. Just me. I needed to think to stay off the grid for a while. I figured a quiet place, far from the cameras, would help me sort through it. And you picked our diner? Riley asked, incredulous. He smiled faintly. I didn't pick it. It picked me. I just kept driving until I ended up here. Riley's head spun. She was still trying to reconcile the man who asked for a grilled cheese with the CEO of one of the world's largest companies talking about corruption and danger. What does this have to do with me? She asked softly. You asked? For $50, he said, as if that explained everything. She blinked. What? You asked boldly, honestly. You didn't pretend. You didn't lie. You just looked me in the eye and told me the truth. Do you know how rare that is? Her eyes dropped to the wet pavement. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. You didn't? He said quickly. You reminded me that there are still good people out there. People who survive by telling the truth, not hiding from it. And right now, that's exactly who I need. She looked up, confused and unsure. Need for what? He reached into his satchel again and pulled out a sleek black tablet. On the screen was a complex network map, red lines connecting various names and files. This is what I've been working on, he said. It's a whistleblower file. Someone inside Google's innovation division discovered a backdoor in our AI framework one that could be exploited by outside groups. And it already has been. If this gets out, it could cause global chaos. Markets, politics, even infrastructure. The whole world runs on systems we help maintain. Riley's stomach turned. It felt like a movie plot, too surreal to be real. So, what do you want me to do? She asked slowly. I don't want you to do anything illegal, Sundar said quickly. But I need help staying invisible. At least for another 24 hours. And more than that, I need someone who knows how to read people. Someone who listens, who sees what others miss. Riley laughed bitterly. I'm just a waitress. No, he said firmly. You're someone who noticed the man wasn't eating his food. Someone who dared to speak when silence was easier. Someone who's lived through struggle without letting it break you. She didn't know what to say. Sundar's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face darkened. They found me, he said quietly. That car. I think it's part of it. I didn't expect them this fast. What do we do? She asked, now fully gripped by fear and adrenaline. I need to disappear again. But this time, I'm not going alone. He paused. Will you come with me? Riley stared at him, stunned. You want me to go with you? Where? Not far, he said. Just somewhere quiet. There's a cabin a few hours north. Secluded. Safe. And from there, I can finish decrypting the rest of this file. But I need someone I can trust to watch my back. Riley shook her head, trying to process everything. It had been a normal day. She'd poured coffee, served pie, laughed with regulars. And now, she was being invited into something that sounded like a tech thriller come to life. What happens if I say no? She asked, voice trembling. He gave her a soft smile. Then I'll pay for the coffee. Thank you for your kindness. And disappear on my own. You'll go back to your life, and this moment will become a strange story you'll never be able to explain. She bit her lip up, but then she thought about the groceries she couldn't afford, the rent overdue, the feeling of being invisible every single day. And now, for once, someone had seen her, not just her job or her smile, but her courage, her honesty. She looked up at him. Okay, she said. I'm in. Sundar exhaled with visible relief. Thank you. Just then, headlights lit up the alley. A second black car had pulled in behind the diner. We have to go. Now, he said, grabbing her hand. They darted through the alley, feet splashing through puddles. The rain returned, heavier now, as if the sky itself was warning them to hurry. They reached his rented SUV, parked 2 blocks away, climbed in, and sped off before the second car even turned down the street as the town disappeared behind them. Riley glanced at Sundar in the driver's seat. You sure about this? She asked. He didn't look at her. Just tighten his grip on the wheel. No, he said. But sometimes the biggest changes in our lives start with one brave question. And yours was, can I have a $50 tip? They drove into the night. 2 strangers caught in a storm neither of them saw coming. But the danger was far from over hundreds of miles away. In a high-rise office tower overlooking Manhattan, a man in a tailored gray suit tapped his fingers against a glass table. His assistant stood nervously by the door. He's gone off-grid, the assistant said. The man didn't flinch, didn't panic. He simply smiled. Let him run. We know where he's going? Then he picked up his phone, dialed a number, and spoke 4 chilling words. Send the extraction team. Asterisk, the cabin in the pines, and the map. No one should see the road stretched endlessly before them, lit only by the pale wash of headlights, and the scattered reflections of rain bouncing off the windshield. Trees lined both sides of the 2-lane road like silent sentinels, their bare branches clawing into the sky. The farther Sundar and Riley drove, the darker the world seemed to become, not just a physical night, but the weight of something larger, pressing down on them like a fog rolling in from the hills. Riley sat quietly in the passenger seat, wrapped in a borrowed fleece jacket she'd pulled from the back seat. Her mind was still reeling. The rain outside sounded like static on broken radio, and each drop seemed to echo her thoughts. She had left everything, her shift, her tips, even her purse, without more than a minute's warning. Now she was on the road with the CEO of Google, a man she'd only known from headlines and tech interviews. And yet, it felt like she had known him for longer than just a few hours. There was something in the way he listened, something in the way he watched the world, not with arrogance, but with quiet, careful thought. We're almost there, Sundar finally said, his voice low and steady. 10 more miles. She turned to look at him. The soft dashboard light cast his face in shadows, but she could see the lines of fatigue etched into his features. This wasn't just some executive on the run from a scandal. This was a man who had seen too much, who carried too much for too long, and who had now decided to trust a complete stranger with more than just a secret. This file, she said, breaking the silence. You said it could affect everything. How bad is it, really? Sundar's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Bad enough that some of the most powerful people in the world want it buried, he said. And bad enough that they're willing to do anything to keep it from going public. Riley's stomach twisted. What's in it? He glanced at her, then back at the road. Proof of manipulation. Data sets altered to influence elections. AI algorithms quietly rewritten to serve private agendas. There's even evidence of global surveillance programs hidden inside software used by billions. If this file reaches the wrong hands, they could destroy people. But if it reaches the right hands, we might have a chance to reset the system. She shivered, not from the cold, but from the truth of it. And you trust me to help with that? I trust your instinct, he said. You see people. You notice things others don't. And right now, I can't afford to be surrounded by people who only see titles and power. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. They pulled off the main road and turned onto a narrow gravel path that twisted through a dense forest of pine trees. The air grew stiller, heavier. The rain lightened, and the darkness deepened, wrapping around them like a thick wool blanket. The cabin emerged suddenly, hidden behind a wall of evergreens. It was small, rustic, and weather-worn, but it stood firm against the elements. A single porch light flickered to life as they pulled up, casting a dim glow across the clearing inside. The cabin smelled of cedar and dust. There was a stone fireplace in the corner, a worn leather couch, and a table littered with old maps and books. Sundar moved quickly, checking the locks on the doors and windows, then turning on a small portable Wi-Fi scrambler. No signals. He said, "Nothing gets in or out unless I open it manually." Riley took it all in silently, her eyes scanning the room. It was like stepping into another world. Here, time didn't seem to exist. There were no phone notifications, no clinking. Coffee cups, no exhausted sighs from behind the diner counter. Just silence. And the occasional crackle from the old wood stove Sundar had just lit. He pulled out the black tablet again and set it on the table. "I've decrypted some of the files," he said, "but there's one folder I couldn't open. It's locked. Behind a voice print, someone else's. Someone who used to work for us. Someone who disappeared 2 years ago under strange circumstances." Riley sat beside him, watching as he navigated through endless lines of code and diagrams. One of the folders flashed red. Access denied. "This is the one," Sundar said, tapping it. "So how do we unlock it?" she asked. He hesitated. "We find her, the woman whose voice is the key. Her name's Dr. Marin Ellis. She was one of our top engineers, worked on deep pattern learning and speech recognition. Brilliant, compassionate, but she started asking too many questions. Then, one day, she vanished. Her apartment was cleared out. No forwarding address. No bank activity. Just gone. And you think she's alive?" "I think she's hiding," he said. "And I think she left a clue." He opened a separate file. It was a map of the same forest they were in. Riley leaned in closer, squinting at the small handwritten note in the corner. "If you're reading this, it means you've chosen the harder path. Follow the stream north until the rocks begin to sing." Riley frowned. "That sounds like a riddle." "It is," Sundar said. "But Marin was always clever like that. So we're going hiking tomorrow?" He smiled for the first time in hours. "Looks like it." They stayed up late, going over the files together. Riley asked questions, took notes, and slowly began to understand just how deep the rabbit hole went. This wasn't just about one company. This was about a global system built on silence, convenience, and hidden hands. She thought about all the times she had felt powerless, voiceless, unseen. Now, she realized that her struggles weren't so different from what was happening on a larger scale. Corruption just wore better suits as the fire crackled low and the night deepened. Riley finally curled up on the couch under a heavy blanket. Sundar sat by the window, staring into the trees. Sleep wouldn't come easily for him, not with the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders, but just as his eyes began to close. He heard it, a twig snapping. Not far then another dot closer. He stood, his breath caught in his throat. From the shadows outside. A red laser dot appeared briefly on the window glass, dropped to the floor just in time. The glass shattered as something heavy struck it, then silence again. Riley jerked awake, heart pounding. What was that? "We're not alone," Sundar said, grabbing the tablet and shutting down the system. "They found us." Riley stared at him, trembling. "What do we do?" "We run, now." He shoved the rest of the gear into his bag and pulled open a trapdoor hidden beneath the rug. A narrow tunnel stretched into the darkness below. "This leads to the river trail. It'll take us to the northern stream, the one Marin wrote about." Riley hesitated for only a second. Then followed him into the dark as the trapdoor slammed shut behind them. Footsteps crept into the cabin above. Men in black boots. Silent. But they were already too late. Asterisk. Voices in the woods, and the woman who vanished at the tunnel was cold and narrow, carved long ago through rock and soil. It smelled of earth and damp moss, and the only light came from Sundar's small, wind-up flashlight, its beam trembling with every step they took. Riley followed close behind him, her breath loud in the silence, heart still hammering from the explosion of shattered glass back in the cabin. Above them, the world had turned dangerous. And here, beneath it, they moved like ghosts in hiding. Neither of them spoke at first. There were only the sounds of boots on stone and the echo of urgency between the narrow walls. But as the tunnel curved and sloped upward, Sundar finally broke the silence. "This tunnel was built by a friend of mine. he said softly, as if even his voice might awaken something dangerous. A long time ago, we used to think it was overkill. Just a safety exit for hiking emergencies. But she always said we'd need it one day. The same friend? Riley asked, clutching the strap of her shoulder bag. Dr. Marin Ellis. He nodded. Brilliant. Paranoid, but brilliant. The tunnel eventually opened up into a small wooden hatch, which Sundar pushed open with a creak. Cool air poured in, and the faint trickle of water echoed nearby. They emerged beneath a thicket of pine trees, hidden behind a rocky outcrop covered in moss. The stream Marin mentioned flowed just ahead, winding like silver through the underbrush. The forest here was different, quieter than the one surrounding the cabin. Older, more ancient. Even the air felt heavier, as though it remembered everything that had ever happened beneath its branches. And somewhere in that quiet, the promise of danger still lingered. The men in black weren't far. They never were. Sundar checked his phone. No. Signal, just as expected. The scrambler had done its job, and now they were truly off-grid. He pulled the folded map from his pocket and pointed to a faint red mark near the edge. This is it, he said. The place Marin marked. She called it the Hollow. If she's still out here, that's where she'd be. Riley glanced around at the towering pines, then back at him. Do you really think she survived out here all this time? Sundar paused. Ben answered in a low voice. I think some people disappear not because they're lost, but because it's the only way they can be found. They began walking north along the stream, careful not to leave footprints in the mud. The sun was beginning to rise where behind the thick clouds, casting everything in a gray-blue glow. Hours passed as they trekked through thick brush, up slippery banks, across fallen logs. Sundar moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had done this before. Riley, though tired and unfamiliar with the terrain, kept up without complaint. She had grown up navigating other kinds of wilderness, poverty, rejection, loneliness. This was just a different kind of survival. Around midday, they reached the bend in the stream. Here, the water split in two around a series of jagged stones. It was then that Riley heard it faint, strange echoes, like humming, but not human, not mechanical. It was the rocks. As the water moved between them, it created a melodic vibration, like whispers trapped in stone. The rocks are singing, she said, eyes wide. Sundar nodded. This is the marker. He led her off the main trail, up a hidden path, cloaked in pine needles and thyme. Finally, they reached a clearing, a bowl-shaped valley nestled between two steep hills. In the center stood a tiny wooden structure, nearly hidden beneath overgrowth and vines. It looked abandoned, forgotten by the world. But as they approached, a motion-activated camera swiveled toward them. She's watching, Sundar said quietly. Riley took a deep breath. So what now? We wait. They stood in silence for nearly 5 minutes. Then the door creaked. Open. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, short gray hair tucked behind her ears. Her face was thin, sharp, alert, but her eyes tired, intelligent, skeptical, softened the moment she saw Sundar. I told you, she said, voice hoarse from disuse. I told you someone would come looking. It's good to see you, Marin, Sundar said, voice filled with relief. She didn't smile. Not exactly. But something in her posture shifted like an old weight temporarily set down. You brought company, she said, eyeing Riley. This is Riley, Sundar replied. I trust her. Marin tilted her head. Not many people you say that about anymore. Riley stepped forward. I didn't ask for any of this, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Marin stared at her for a moment longer. Then, finally, she opened the door wider. Then come in, both of you. Before they find us, inside, the cabin was like stepping into a forgotten lab. Computer parts littered the walls. Solar-powered lights hummed softly overhead. Hand-drawn maps were pinned at resurface. Marin moved quickly, shutting multiple locks behind them before flipping a series of switches that activated an internal shielding system. What took you so long? She asked Sundar, removing a hidden drive from her sleeve. I had to be sure. He replied, sure it was safe. Sure I wasn't followed. You were followed, she said. They're not far behind. Riley's stomach dropped. How do you know? Marin pointed to a small monitor. It showed infrared footprints. Red. Blips moving steadily through the forest toward their position. I've got about 30 minutes before they reach the perimeter. Maybe less if they brought drones. Sundar pulled out his tablet. We don't need long. Just help me unlock this. Marin connected her drive to the tablet and leaned over it, studying the encrypted folder. Riley stood back, watching as the two of them worked in tandem, geniuses in sync. Decoding secrets that could change the world. Voice print required. The screen flashed. Marin leaned in and whispered, Unlock protocol Ellis 7 Alpha. The screen went black for a moment. Then a flood of files appeared. Videos, memos, hidden reports, signed orders. Communications between top officials and private tech firms. Riley's eyes widened. This is, everything. Marin nodded. This is the truth no one wants the world to see. Sundar downloaded everything onto an encrypted chip, just as a soft alarm sounded from Marin's panel. They're here, she said. Riley turned to the window. Dark figures moved silently through the trees. Marin looked at Sundar. Take the Eastern Trail. It leads to a ranger station 2 miles out. I'll hold them off. I'm not leaving you, he said. You have to, she said, fierce now. You still have a face. You still have power. And she glanced at Riley. She's your witness. Go. Sundar hesitated, then grabbed Riley's hand. We'll come back, he promised Marin. I swear it. Just make sure the world knows, she replied. Make sure this wasn't all for nothing. They bolted out the back door into the trees behind them. The cabin lights blinked red, and as the shadows closed in around Marin, she stood tall, ready to face them. Ready to protect the truth. The truth in her hands and the road that doesn't turn back. Forest was no longer peaceful. Every branch that cracked beneath their feet felt like a shot fired in the dark. Every rustle in the leaves above seemed like the hiss of a drone sweeping low. The gentle mist of morning had turned to a curtain of tension, and the trees, so still before, now stood like frozen witnesses to a chase. Neither Sundar nor Riley had prepared for. They ran without speaking. Sundar led the way through narrow trails and forgotten deer paths, his steps sure and deliberate despite the growing pain in his knees. Riley followed close behind, her lungs burning, her heart pounding, but her will unshaken. The forest was a maze of shadows and sounds, and behind them, those shadows moved closer. Every now and then, they heard the faint hum of electronics, small reconnaissance drones slicing through the branches above. Sundar would stop abruptly, motion Riley to freeze, and they crouched behind a fallen tree or a thick fern, holding their breath until the threat passed. The enemy wasn't in a rush. They were hunting with precision, confident that no one could outrun them forever. This way, Sundar whispered finally, pointing toward a break in the trees. Or close. Riley said nothing, but the ache in her legs was starting to turn numb. Still, she pressed on. Because she knew deep down, this wasn't just about escaping. This was about delivering the truth. She wasn't just carrying her own future now. She was carrying the truth of a system built on silence. And it weighed more than any backpack ever could. After nearly an hour of navigating the rugged terrain, they reached a ridge that overlooked a narrow valley. In the distance, nestled beside a river, was a small wooden structure, a fire lookout post, repurposed as a ranger station. Sundar exhaled in relief. That's it. They have a satellite uplink. If we get inside, we can broadcast the files securely, anonymously. Every journalist and watchdog in the world will have access within minutes. Riley nodded, but a question burned in her chest. What if they shut it down or block it before it goes out? Sundar looked at her, his eyes clear and calm. They can't stop the truth once it's everywhere. Together, they began the final descent toward the station. But just as they reached the bottom of the slope, a voice cut through the still air. Don't move. They froze. From the trees stepped a man in black tactical gear, his face partially hidden by a mask, but his posture was unmistakable, confident, trained and armed. He wasn't alone. More shadows emerged behind him. 3, 4, maybe more. Sundar stepped forward, slowly, hands raised. You don't want to do this, he said. There's still time to walk away. The lead man laughed, a short, cold sound. You're not in Silicon Valley anymore. Pichai. No press. No boardroom. No safety net. Riley stepped closer to Sundar, her fingers tightening around the small metal chip he had slipped into her pocket moments earlier. The chip that held everything, the man pointed to her. Give me the drive. Riley didn't flinch. No. His eyes narrowed. You think you're heroes? This isn't about justice. It's about control, balance. The world needs systems. We are those systems. You're just scared, Sundar said quietly. Scared of what happens when people know. The truth. The man's lip curled. Last warning. Riley stepped forward, heart thundering. Or what? You'll shoot us in a forest? Silence us, like you silenced Marin. He stiffened at the name. She made her choice. No, Riley said, louder. Now, you made it for her? And with that, she did something no one expected. She ran straight for the ranger station. The moment fractured into chaos. Shouts echoed through the trees. Sundar moved to block the men, shouting after her to go. To keep running? Bullets ripped through the bark of trees, spraying splinters into the air. Riley didn't look back. The pain in her legs vanished beneath the flood of adrenaline. All she could see was the door ahead, the final barrier. The last chance. She burst through it, slamming it shut behind her. Inside, the room was dusty, but functional solar-powered computers blinked to life. She yanked the chair out, jammed the chip into the terminal, and the screen lit up with a flash of code. Upload initiated. Outside, she heard the chaos closing in. Boots. Shouts. Gunfire. 10%. 17%. Sundar burst through the trees, blood trailing. From a cut across his brow, he stumbled inside, slammed a wooden beam against the door, and locked it. They're coming. He gasped. Double quotes, I know, she said. But it's uploading. He leaned over her shoulder, eyes wide as the files spread into the network, bouncing through secure servers, torrenting across mirrors. 43%. 52%. Outside, a voice roared. Open the door now or we burn it down. Sundar looked at her. There's no backup power. If they cut the line? Riley didn't wait. She grabbed the satellite uplink cord, ran it to her phone, and hot-spotted a backup connection through the last bit of signal they had. The upload paused. Then resumed. 72%. 89%. A loud crash shook the walls. They were trying to batter the door. Sundar pulled a flare gun from the supply shelf. It wasn't much, but it would delay them. 99%. 100%. Upload complete. Riley slumped back in her chair, breathless. It's done, she whispered. Sundar stepped outside the booth, firing the flare into the air. A flash of red burst above the trees. An emergency signal. From the distance came another sound. Rotors. Helicopter. Riley stared in disbelief. You had a backup plan? Sundar smiled. Finally. Not me. Marin. They stepped out together as the sound grew louder. The black-clad men turned toward the sky, confused, uncertain. The flare still burned above them, red against the pale gray daylight. And through the rising wind, the truth flew across the world, unstoppable. Now, emails, recordings, policies, proof of the invisible hands that had shaped the lives of billions. News. Outlets buzzed. Governments panicked. And two figures stood in the clearing. Not as fugitives, but as bearers of light. But as the helicopter descended and rescue arrived, Riley looked at Sundar and asked one final question. What happens now? And his answer was soft, real. Now, we see who is brave enough to listen. The morning after the storm and the world that watched its sky over Washington. London, Delhi, Berlin, and Tokyo was never quite the same again. Satellites blinked. Under the weight of sudden truth, News feeds erupted like wildfire, their usual blur of scandal and distraction replaced by one overwhelming word: exposed. Files decrypted. Communications leaked. Footage aired. Names named. Faces shown, but in a quiet hospital room outside the city, miles from flashing cameras and armed guards, Riley James lay still, her hand wrapped loosely around a cup of warm tea. The hum of machines was soft, and the morning sunlight pushed through the blinds like a gentle visitor. Outside her window, reporters had begun to gather, not for gossip, not for scandal, but for something rare in a cynical world, a glimpse of courage. She had been stitched up and stabilized. A graze from shrapnel near her ribs, a bruised shoulder from falling in the station, and complete emotional exhaustion. But she was alive, and so was the truth. Sundar sat beside her, his brow creased, not from stress, but from something deeper. Reflection. There were no press agents in the room. No board members. Just a man who had once sat alone in a booth with a grilled cheese sandwich, and now found himself beside a waitress who had risked everything. "They're calling you the girl with the voice," he said softly. She looked at him, confused. "Why?" He smiled faintly. "Because your voice started the avalanche. You asked for $50. You asked without shame, without pretense." And that question led to everything that followed. She blinked slowly, then let out a tired laugh. "I didn't mean to change the world. I just wanted to pay rent." "Maybe that's how it always starts," he said. Not with a speech, but with a whisper that someone finally listens to. Outside, the hospital doors opened. Security tightened. A woman in a dark coat stepped through the main hallway. Doctor. Marinellis.alive.rumors had already begun to swirl online. Some claimed she was never real. Others insisted she had been a ghost in the machine, a myth whispered in tech circles. But here she was, scarred but standing, silent but seen. When she entered Riley's room, her eyes softened instantly. "You made it?" she said, sitting at the edge of the bed. Riley looked up, a lump rising in her throat. "They said you stayed." "Behind." "I did," Marin replied. "But even ghosts need to resurface eventually." They sat in silence for a moment. Three people who had lived different lives, walked different roads, and found themselves bound together by a decision to do what was right, regardless of the cost. But the world beyond the room had already begun to move across the globe. The fallout was swift. CEO has resigned. Politicians denied. Investigations launched. Every major outlet confirmed the file's authenticity. Public hearings were scheduled. World leaders issued statements. Civil societies rallied. Some screamed for reform. Others tried desperately to spin the story into confusion. But one thing was certain. There was no going back. Meanwhile, back in the small town where it all started, the diner reopened 2 days later. People whispered about what had happened, unsure if it was real or legend. Tourists arrived just to sit at the corner booth. Someone had placed a small plaque under the window that read, "This is where the world shifted over coffee and courage." A week passed. Then 2. Riley, now fully recovered, returned to her old neighborhood one last time. Not to stay, but to say goodbye. She walked past the laundry where her uniform once hung on hooks, past the corner bodega where she used to count coins for eggs, past the bus stop where she used to wait in the cold, wondering if anything in life would ever change. She stood there quietly, breathing in the stillness of the moment, until a sleek car pulled up beside her. Sundar stepped out. "Ready?" He asked. "I think so," she replied. "The foundation's been approved," he said. "It's yours to lead." She blinked. "Mine? You earned it," he said. "The world needs people who see others, who listen, who ask the hard questions. Not for attention, but because they care." She smiled. It wasn't the smile of someone who had escaped. It was the smile of someone who had endured and grown and now stood at the edge of something greater. Together, they drove to a quiet building outside the city. Inside was a team of people, diverse, passionate, brilliant, ready to rebuild trust in technology. Riley walked through the halls slowly, watching engineers and ethicists working side by side. She paused beside one room where two young women were translating the leaked files into accessible public formats. We call this the echo room, Sundar said behind her. Why? Because truth echoes, he replied. And this is where we make sure it never fades.